The reflection staring back at me wasn't a ghost, but she felt like one. For 2 years I had allowed my ex-husband Justin to erase me. He took my confidence, my home, and my future, replacing me with a younger, shinier model. Tonight was the Innovatech Solutions annual gala, the one night of the year I couldn't avoid him and his smug satisfaction. I was prepared for the pitying stares, the whispers, his condescending smirk. I was prepared for my own personal hell. What I wasn't prepared for was him cornering me, his mistress dripping in diamonds on his arm, ready to deliver the final public humiliation. And I certainly wasn't prepared for what I did next, or for the man whose world I was about to crash into. The anniversary of a divorce is a strange beast. It isn't celebrated like a wedding, nor is it mourned like a death, yet it carries the weight of both. For me, Natalie Pierce, it was today. 2 years since the ink dried on the papers that officially severed my life from Justin Caldwell's. 2 years of learning to sleep in the middle of the bed again. 2 years of referring to myself as I instead of we. My life now was a quiet, orderly thing. I lived in a modest apartment in the city, a place that was mine and mine alone, filled with second-hand books and thriving potted plants. My work at Innovatech Solutions was my anchor. As a senior data analyst, I found comfort in the clean, predictable logic of numbers. I could make sense of algorithms and predictive models. They, unlike people, never lied or changed their minds unexpectedly. I was good at my job, brilliant even though you wouldn't know it. I existed in the background, a ghost in the corporate machine, producing insightful reports that my department head, a man named George Peterson, would present as his own with a few minor tweaks. I never complained. It was easier to be invisible. Justin, of course, was anything but invisible. He was a vice president in the marketing department at the same company. He was charisma and ambition poured into a tailored suit. We had met at Innovatech, a classic office romance that had blossomed into what I thought was a forever love. I had supported his climb up the corporate ladder, editing his presentations late into the night, hosting dinners for his superiors, and sacrificing my own ambitions for his. I was the steadfast, reliable foundation upon which he built his empire. And then when the empire was secure, he replaced the foundation. Her name was Tiffany Reed. She had been his executive assistant, a 20-something with flawless skin, a razor-sharp wardrobe, and an ambition that rivaled Justin's. I discovered their affair through the classic soul-crushing cliché, a hotel receipt carelessly left in a coat pocket. The confrontation was a blur of his cold, practiced excuses and my raw, shattered disbelief. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked relieved. "We've just grown apart, Natty," he had said, as if our 15 years together were a sweater he'd simply outgrown. The divorce was brutal. He used his corporate power and high-priced lawyers to paint me as unstable and demanding. I walked away with a fraction of what I was owed and a gaping wound where my self-esteem used to be. He and Tiffany were engaged within 6 months, which brought me to tonight, the Innovatech Solutions annual gala at the Grand Astoria Hotel. A night of forced smiles, cheap champagne, and corporate back-patting. It was mandatory for all employees at my level and above. For the past 2 years, I had conveniently come down with a migraine on the day of the gala. But not this year. My best friend Sarah Jenkins, a fiery lawyer who had helped me through the worst of the divorce, had forbidden it. "You are going, Natty," she had declared over the phone last week, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You are going to get your hair done. You are going to wear that stunning emerald dress we bought 6 months ago that's still hiding in your closet. And you are going to walk in there with your head held so high you could get a nosebleed. You are not a ghost. You helped build that company with your work. You have a right to be there." Her words echoed in my mind now as I stood before my full-length mirror. The woman in the emerald silk dress was a stranger. The dress clung to my curves in a way that was elegant yet undeniably powerful. My usually practical brown hair was swept up in a soft, intricate style, and the makeup, which I'd had professionally done at Sarah's insistence, highlighted my eyes and gave me a confidence I didn't feel. But as I looked into my own eyes, I saw the fear. I wasn't afraid of Justin, not anymore. I was afraid of the pity, I was afraid of the whispers from colleagues who knew the whole sordid story. I was afraid of the triumphant, proprietary look Tiffany would give me, the look that said, "I won." My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Showtime superstar, remember who you are. Now go make them choke on their canapés." A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that day. She was right. Hiding had done nothing but shrink my world until it was the size of my small apartment. Tonight I wasn't going as Justin Caldwell's pathetic ex-wife. I was going as Natalie Pierce, senior data analyst. I had a name. I had a place. And for the first time in 2 years, I was determined to take up space. I took one last deep breath, grabbed my clutch, and walked out the door, the silk of the dress whispering promises of a night that would change everything. The Grand Astoria Hotel's ballroom was designed to intimidate. Soaring ceilings dripped with crystal chandeliers casting a golden, forgiving light over the throngs of people. The air hummed with the symphony of corporate success, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of self-important conversations, and a string quartet playing something Vivaldi-esque in the corner. For a moment, I felt my resolve falter. This was Justin's world, the world of glad-handing networking and surface-level charm. My world was the quiet hum of a server room and the stark black and white of a spreadsheet. Taking a steadying breath, I handed my coat to an attendant and stepped into the fray. The first few minutes were the hardest. I could feel the subtle shift in the room's energy as people noticed me. It was a ripple of recognition followed by quickly averted eyes and hushed whispers. I saw Brenda from accounting nudge her husband, her eyes wide. I saw Mark from logistics give me a small, pitying smile. It was exactly as I had feared. I was a spectacle. The ghost had materialized, and no one knew quite what to do with her. I made a beeline for the bar, needing a prop, a shield. "Champagne, please," I said to the bartender, my voice steadier than I felt. "Natty, is that you?" I turned to see my department head, George Peterson, standing beside me, his eyes bugging out slightly. "Wow, you clean up nice," he said, the compliment landing with all the grace of a dropped filing cabinet. "Hello, George," I said, forcing a smile. "Good to see you, too." "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you were allergic to fun." He chuckled, oblivious as ever. George was the man who had built his career on my analytical work. Just last month, my deep dive analysis on market vulnerabilities, a project I'd poured 80-hour weeks into and code-named Project Chimera, had directly led to the company preempting a major competitor's move, saving us an estimated $50 million. George had presented the findings to the board and received a hefty bonus. I had received a company-wide email thanking George Peterson and his team for their hard work. Before I could formulate a polite reply, a new voice cut through the air, sharp and sickly sweet. Well, look what the cat dragged in. And there he was, Justin. He stood there, a vision of tailored perfection in a Tom Ford tuxedo, a smug grin plastered on his handsome face. And on his arm, clinging to him like expensive ivy, was Tiffany. She was wearing a crimson dress that was practically sprayed on a massive diamond engagement ring, catching the light with every slight movement. It was a calculated display of everything I had lost. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I straightened my spine. "Head high, Natty. Head high." "Justin," I said, my voice a cool, even tone that surprised even me. "Tiffany, you both look, well." Justin's grin widened. He thrived on this, on having both his past and his present on display with him as the undisputed prize. "We are. Business is booming, life is good. You remember Tiffany, of course." Tiffany gave me a smile that didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. "Natalie, it's so brave of you to come." Brave. The word was a perfectly aimed dart meant to frame me as a victim, a charity case. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to retreat back to the safety of my quiet apartment. But then I saw the look in Justin's eyes. It was pity, yes, but underneath it was a deep, unshakable arrogance. the look of a man who believed he had completely and utterly broken me, that he had won. And a spark of defiance, long dormant, flickered to life inside me. "I work here, Tiffany," I replied, my voice losing its tremor and gaining a note of steel. "I don't need bravery to attend a company event." I turned my gaze back to Justin. I was just congratulating George on his recent bonus, a result of that fantastic Project Chimera presentation, really groundbreaking work. George shifted uncomfortably while Justin's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He knew I was the architect of that project. He had seen my early drafts dismissing them as overly complicated and a waste of time. "Yes, well," Justin said, recovering quickly. "George's team really knocked it out of the park. Some people are meant to be in the spotlight and others, well, they're better with the numbers in the background. Know your strengths, right?" He delivered the line with a patronizing wink meant to remind me of my place. He was the star, and I was the stagehand. The humiliation was a hot flush that crept up my neck. He was doing this deliberately in front of my boss, in front of everyone, to cement his narrative of the triumphant ex and the forgotten wife. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. The old panic, the feeling of being small and voiceless in his presence, was choking me. Tiffany twisted the knife. "Don't worry, Natalie. I'm sure your day will come. Maybe they'll give out an award for most improved," she said with a tinkling laugh. I stood there, frozen, the champagne flute cold in my hand. This was it, the moment I had dreaded. I had walked into the lion's den, and they were about to tear me apart. My carefully constructed armor was cracking, and the ghost I had tried to leave behind was threatening to consume me whole. Just as the silence stretched into an unbearable, suffocating blanket, a new presence made itself felt beside me. It wasn't an arrival announced with trumpets, but the effect was much the same. A palpable shift occurred in our immediate vicinity. The ambient chatter dipped. George Peterson straightened his tie and paled slightly. Justin's smug expression flickered, replaced by one of genuine shock and deference. A low, calm voice, smooth as aged whiskey, broke the tension. "Project Chimera," I read that report. "It wasn't just groundbreaking, it was visionary. The predictive modeling was some of the most elegant data architecture I've seen in a decade." I turned. Standing there was a man who seemed to command the very air around him. He was tall, with a quiet intensity that was more compelling than Justin's performative charm. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored black suit with no tie, a statement of effortless power. His hair was dark, with distinguished streaks of silver at the temples, and his eyes, a startlingly intelligent shade of gray, were fixed directly on me. I had no idea who he was, but clearly everyone else did. "Mr. Laurent." Justin stammered, his arm instinctively tightening around Tiffany. I didn't realize you were here tonight." Laurent. The name clicked. Dominic Laurent. The legendary, almost mythical founder of Laurent Capital, the private equity firm that had acquired a majority stake in Innovatech Solutions 6 months ago. He was the new king on the chessboard, a Silicon Valley prodigy, who had turned a small startup into a global empire. He was notoriously private, rarely attending these kinds of functions. His presence here was the equivalent of a royal visit. Dominic Laurent's gaze didn't leave my face. He gave no indication that he had even heard Justin. "The author of that report is in George's department, I believe. I've been wanting to meet them." He extended a hand to me, his expression one of genuine curiosity. "I'm Dominic Laurent." My mind raced. He thought George wrote the report. Or maybe he thought it was some other rising star on the team. My moment of choice was stark. I could shrink back, let George or Justin take the credit as they always did, and remain the ghost. Or I could claim my work. My hand, surprisingly steady, met his. His grip was firm and warm. "Natalie Pierce," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I wrote the Project Chimera report." A spectrum of emotions flashed across the faces in our small circle. George looked like he was about to swallow his own tongue. Tiffany's perfectly painted smile tightened into a thin line of confusion. And Justin? Justin looked utterly thunderstruck. A flicker of disbelief warred with a flash of pure, unadulterated fury in his eyes. Dominic Laurent's eyebrows raised slightly, a glimmer of respect in his gray eyes. "Ms. Pierce, it's a genuine pleasure. I have to say your work is the primary reason I greenlit the next phase of funding. You have a remarkable mind." The validation was so direct, so powerful, it was like a physical shock. For years my work had been absorbed and rebranded by others. To have the most powerful man in the room not only recognize it, but praise it, felt like stepping out into the sun after a lifetime in a windowless room. "Thank you, Mr. Laurent," I managed to say. "I appreciate that." "Dominic, please," he said with a small, genuine smile. He then turned his cool, analytical gaze towards George and Justin. "It's interesting. The official summary that reached my desk had George Peterson's name as the project lead." George began to sweat. "Well, you know it's a team effort, Mr. Laurent, a big team, and Natalie is a vital part of that team. In the background, you know, crunching the numbers." Justin, ever the opportunist, jumped in, trying to regain control. "Exactly, Natty's a whiz with the raw data, always has been. But it takes a certain kind of vision to see the big picture, to package it for the boardroom. That's where leadership comes in." He placed a proprietary hand on George's shoulder, attempting to form a united front. He was trying to relegate me back to my box, the numbers girl, even in the face of Dominic Laurent himself. Dominic's expression remained unreadable, but a certain coldness entered his eyes. He looked from Justin's desperate face back to mine. He saw the whole dynamic laid bare: the dismissive ex-husband, the credit-stealing boss, and the woman who had done the actual work. "The big picture is irrelevant if the foundation is flawed," Dominic said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of command. "And the foundation of that report, its very architecture, was its most brilliant feature. That isn't leadership, Mr. Caldwell. That's genius." He turned his full attention back to me, effectively dismissing the other three. "Tell me, Natalie, what are you working on now?" It was a lifeline, a chance to step away from the toxic vortex of my past and into a conversation that was about my mind, my work, my future. As I began to explain my newest project, a nascent idea about leveraging quantum analytics for consumer trend prediction, I felt the weight of Justin's glare on my back. He was losing control, and he couldn't stand it. The ghost he thought he'd buried was not only standing in the spotlight, but was holding the rapt attention of the one man he desperately needed to impress. And I knew with a chilling certainty that he wouldn't let this go. The world seemed to shrink until it was just the two of us. Dominic Laurent was a phenomenal listener. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to steer the conversation. He simply absorbed what I was saying about quantum analytics, his sharp gray eyes reflecting a deep, focused intelligence. He asked incisive questions that pushed my thinking, questions that showed he wasn't just hearing the words, but understanding the complex concepts behind them. For the first time in years, I felt seen not as a wife, an ex-wife, or a subordinate, but as an intellectual peer. So by using a quantum-inspired algorithm, we could theoretically map consumer desire before the consumer is even consciously aware of it. I concluded, a flush of excitement coloring my cheeks. It's still theoretical, of course. The processing power required is immense. But the theory is sound, Dominic said, a thoughtful expression on his face. It's elegant, disruptive. Why haven't I heard about this? I haven't formally proposed it yet, I admitted. George felt it was too blue sky for our current R&D budget. A corner of Dominic's mouth twitched. George's budget is about to become significantly more flexible. The implication hung in the air, a promise of a future I hadn't dared to dream of. Behind us, I was acutely aware of Justin stewing. He and Tiffany had not moved. They were stuck orbiting our conversation, unable to leave without looking petty, yet unable to join in. I could feel the heat of his anger radiating from across the small space. He had planned to humiliate me, to put me in my place. Instead, he had become an unwilling spectator to my validation by the most powerful man in the room. His ego, a fragile and gargantuan thing, couldn't withstand it. He chose that moment to make his move. "Well, well, don't let our little Katie get your hopes up too high, Dominic," Justin said, stepping forward with a forced, jovial laugh. He draped his arm over my shoulder in a gesture that was meant to look friendly but felt heavy and possessive, a brand of his past ownership. I flinched. She's always had these big, fanciful ideas. It's cute, but when it comes to the real world, the boardroom, she tends to get a little overwhelmed. She's more of a behind-the-scenes type. The condescension was thick enough to taste. He was trying to frame me as a flighty, emotional woman incapable of handling the pressure of real power. He was using our shared history as a weapon, implying a knowledge of my weaknesses that Dominic couldn't possibly have. He wasn't just trying to discredit me professionally, he was trying to diminish me as a person, to put me back into the box he had built for me. Tiffany stood beside him, a smug little smirk on her face, enjoying the show. My blood ran cold, then hot. The years of being silenced, of being made to feel small, of swallowing my anger and hurt, all of it coalesced into a single white-hot point of fury. I looked at Justin's handsome, patronizing face, and I didn't see the man I had once loved. I saw a jailer, and then I looked at Dominic. He hadn't reacted to Justin's comment, but his eyes were like chips of ice. He was watching me, waiting to see what I would do. His expression wasn't one of pity, it was one of expectation. He had called my work genius. He had treated me with respect. He was waiting for Natalie Pierce to act like the woman who wrote that report. In that split second, a decision was made. It wasn't logical. It wasn't calculated. It was pure instinctual rebellion. It was an act of self-liberation. I shrugged off Justin's arm. I turned to face Dominic, whose surprised eyes met mine. I reached up, placed my hand gently on the lapel of his perfect suit, rose on my toes, and pressed my lips against his. It was not a long kiss. It was not a passionate kiss. It was a statement. It was a full stop at the end of a sentence that had gone on for far too long. It was the taste of champagne and defiance. For a brief moment there was a surprised stillness from him, and then a subtle, almost imperceptible response, a softening of his lips before I pulled away. The entire ballroom, which had been a dull roar, seemed to fall utterly and completely silent. The string quartet faltered mid-note. Every head in our vicinity had turned. The sound that followed was a collective sharp intake of breath. I lowered myself back to my heels, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't look at the shocked faces of the onlookers. I didn't look at Dominic, whose own expression was one of stunned appraisal. I looked directly at Justin, and I watched him freeze. It was as if he'd been turned to stone. His mouth was slightly agape, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him a pasty, sickly white. The smugness, the arrogance, the condescending charm had all shattered, evaporating in an instant. In his eyes, I saw a maelstrom of confusion, fury, and something I had never ever seen there before. Utter and complete defeat. He looked at me, then at the billionaire standing next to me, then back at me, his mind unable to compute the reality of what he had just witnessed. His ex-wife, the quiet, mousy numbers girl he had discarded, had just kissed Dominic Laurent in the middle of the company gala. Checkmate. The silence that followed the kiss was a living thing, heavy and charged. It lasted only a few seconds, but in that span of time an entire social hierarchy was dismantled and rebuilt. Then the whispers started erupting like brush fires all around us. It was no longer about pitying poor Natty. It was about the shocking audacity of what had just happened. Tiffany was the first to break the tableau, her perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of ugly disbelief. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed at me, her voice a venomous whisper, but her words were just noise. My focus, and indeed the entire room's focus, was on the two men. Justin remained frozen, a statue of impotent rage. His world had been turned upside down. He, the master of optics and image, had been publicly and spectacularly upstaged. Dominic Laurent, however, was a study in composure. The initial shock in his eyes had been replaced by something else. something I couldn't quite decipher, a mix of amusement and intense calculation. He looked at Justin's stunned face, then at the gossiping crowd, and finally his gaze settled back on me. There was no anger in his expression. He gave a slow, deliberate nod as if I had just proven a complex theorem he had been considering. Then, in a move of pure strategic genius, he gently took my elbow. His touch was light but firm, a clear signal of alliance. "Natalie and I were just discussing a confidential project," he announced, his voice calm and authoritative, easily cutting through the rising tide of whispers. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." He didn't wait for an answer. He simply began to steer me away from the epicenter of the explosion we had created, leaving Justin and Tiffany standing amidst the social debris. As we walked, a path parted for us through the crowd as if by magic. The whispers followed us, but no one dared to meet my eye. I held my head high, my body thrumming with a terrifying and exhilarating cocktail of adrenaline and fear. What had I done? Dominic led me not out of the ballroom, but through a side door I hadn't even noticed, which opened onto a quiet, deserted balcony overlooking the city. The cool night air was a welcome shock to my heated skin. The distant sounds of traffic were a soothing hum compared to the cacophony inside. For a long moment we just stood there, neither of us speaking. I stared out at the glittering tapestry of city lights, my mind racing. I had just kissed a billionaire, my new boss's boss's boss, in front of my entire company to spite my ex-husband. I was almost certainly going to be fired. "Well," Dominic finally said, his voice laced with a dry amusement. That was one way to end a conversation. I finally dared to look at him. "Mr. Laurent." "Dominic, I am so sorry. I don't know what came over me. That was unprofessional and impulsive, and He held up a hand, stopping my frantic apology. "Natalie," he said, and his use of my name was strangely calming. "First, let's be clear. You have absolutely nothing to be sorry for." He leaned against the balcony railing, turning to face me. "I've been in boardrooms my entire adult life. I've witnessed hostile takeovers, corporate espionage, and brutal character assassinations. And I can honestly say I've rarely seen someone so effectively neutralize a threat with such precision and economy of motion." I stared at him, baffled. "Neutralize a threat?" "Your ex-husband," he clarified. "He was attempting to publicly diminish you, to poison my perception of your capabilities by framing you as an unstable, fanciful subordinate. He used his personal history with you as leverage. You in turn used a non-verbal but universally understood gesture to completely obliterate that leverage. You didn't just get back at him, you shifted the entire power dynamic of that room. Brilliantly, I might add." I was floored. I had expected anger, or at the very least a stern lecture. I had not expected a tactical breakdown of my impulsive act of defiance. I just wanted him to stop," I whispered, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving a shaky vulnerability in its wake. "He has spent 2 years making me feel worthless. And tonight, when he saw that I might have something for myself, something he couldn't control, he tried to take that too." Dominic's expression softened. "I gathered as much," he said. "When I read your Project Chimera report, I asked for the preliminary submission logs. The initial file was uploaded under your name, Natalie. 3 days later, it was resubmitted from George Peterson's terminal with a new cover page. The metadata showed that Caldwell's VP-level access key was used to authorize the revision. They didn't just take credit for your work. They actively conspired to bury your involvement." The breath left my lungs. It was one thing to suspect, to feel the injustice in my bones. It was another to have it confirmed, laid out as a set of cold, hard facts by the one man who could do something about it. The betrayal felt fresh, a sharp physical pain. "I had no idea," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "They underestimated you," Dominic stated simply. "And your ex-husband specifically seems to have made the critical error of believing his own narrative about you. Tonight you showed him and everyone else who you really are." A tear I hadn't realized was coming slipped down my cheek. I hastily wiped it away. This was all too much. The humiliation, the defiance, the validation, the shocking revelation. "So what now?" I asked, my voice small. "Am I fired?" Dominic actually laughed, a low, pleasant sound. "Fired, Natalie? I don't fire assets like you. I promote them. The Blue Sky Quantum Analytics project you mentioned, I'm officially funding it. Effective Monday, you will be heading a new independent R&D division. You'll report directly to me. You can poach anyone you want from Peterson's team, and your budget will be whatever you deem necessary." I felt my knees go weak. Head of a division report to him. It was unthinkable. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept." He said, his gray eyes serious. "Don't let them win by making you doubt yourself for one more second. Take what you've earned." The kiss had been an act of rebellion, a moment of madness, but it had blasted open a door I never knew existed. Standing on that balcony, with the city sprawling beneath me and the man who was offering me my entire future standing before me, I felt the last vestiges of the ghost Justin had tried to make me into finally mercifully fade away. Returning to the office on Monday morning was like walking onto a movie set the day after a dramatic scene had been filmed. The air was thick with unspoken words. The usual hum of keyboards and quiet chatter was replaced by a tense silence that broke into frantic whispers whenever I passed by. I was no longer Natalie Pierce, the quiet data analyst. I was a myth, a legend. I was the woman who kissed the billionaire. My walk from the elevator to my cubicle felt a mile long. People stared openly, their faces a mixture of awe, envy, and morbid curiosity. Brenda from accounting gave me a wide-eyed thumbs up. Mark from logistics practically bowed. It was surreal and deeply uncomfortable, but underneath the discomfort, there was a new, unfamiliar feeling power. My actions had consequences, and for the first time those consequences weren't things happening to me, but things happening because of me. My first order of business was to bypass my old desk entirely and head straight for George Peterson's office. I knocked once and entered without waiting for an invitation. He was on the phone, but his face went ashen when he saw me. He quickly mumbled an excuse and hung up. "Natalie," he stammered, scrambling to his feet. "I was just about to call you. I heard there are some rumors." "They're not rumors, George," I said, my voice even and calm. I placed a single sheet of paper on his polished desk. It was a list of 4 names, the brightest, most underutilized analysts on his team. "Mr. Laurent has approved the formation of a new quantum analytics division. I'll be leading it. These are the people I'm taking with me. Human Resources will send over the official transfer papers this afternoon." George stared at the list, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He was losing his best people, the very foundation of the team he supposedly led. He was being hollowed out. "You can't do that," he sputtered. "They're essential to my Q4 projects." "Then you should have thought of that before you put your name on my Q2 project." I replied without a shred of malice. It was just a fact. I turned and walked out, leaving him sputtering in my wake. There was no pleasure in it, only a grim sense of accounts being balanced. The main event, however, came an hour later. An urgent all-hands email summoned the entire marketing department to the main conference room. Whispers intensified. My new temporary office had a direct view of the glass-walled room. I watched as Justin walked in, his face a tight mask of anxiety. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. Tiffany was not present. Rumor had it she hadn't shown up for work at all. A few minutes later, the company's CEO, Robert Miller, and 2 board members walked in, followed by a woman from Human Resources. They did not look pleased. The meeting was brief and brutal. Though I couldn't hear the words, the visuals were telling. Justin gesticulated wildly, trying to explain, to plead. Robert Miller's face remained impassive. The HR representative slid a thick folder across the table. Justin's shoulders slumped. He had been so adept at playing the corporate game, but he had broken the one unspoken rule. He had embarrassed the company in front of its new owner. The king had been publicly humiliated, and the board was cutting its losses. He walked out of that room a different man. His arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollowed-out look of utter shock. His colleagues avoided his gaze. As he passed my office, his eyes met mine through the glass. There was no anger left, only a raw, desperate confusion, as if he was trying to understand how the woman he had deemed so insignificant could have possibly engineered his downfall. But I hadn't engineered it. He had built his own guillotine. I had simply let it fall. He was escorted to his office to pack his things and was gone from the building within the hour. Later that day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Tiffany. Her voice was stripped of all its usual confidence. "I just wanted you to know," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "that I left him, at the gala. I saw his face when it happened. He didn't look at me. He didn't even care I was there. All he cared about was that he had lost, that you had won." She took a shaky breath. "I was a prop, a shiny object to make him look good. I thought I was smarter than that." "I'm sorry, Tiffany," I said, and to my surprise I meant it. She had been a willing participant, but she was also another victim of Justin's all-consuming ego. "Don't be," she said with a bitter laugh. "You're free, and now I guess I am too. Good luck, Natalie." She hung up. The day was a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and introductions. HR fast-tracked everything. My new division was given a prime suite of offices on the executive floor. The 4 analysts I'd chosen accepted my offer with stunned enthusiasm, eager to work on something new and exciting. By 5 o'clock, I was standing in my new office, an office 4 times the size of my old cubicle, with a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. It was quiet. The chaos had subsided. Justin was gone. George was neutered. A new future was laid out before me, a future built not on a man's approval, but on my own mind and my own merit. The kiss had been the catalyst, the spark that lit the fuse, but the groundwork had been laid over years of quiet, diligent work. Dominic Laurent hadn't saved me. He had simply opened his eyes and seen the person who was there all along. The reckoning was over, and as I watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, I knew with absolute certainty that this was not an ending but a beginning. The weeks that followed were a tectonic shift, a remaking of my professional and personal landscape. The theoretical concept of leading a new division became a tangible reality, a whirlwind of intense, exhilarating work. My new office on the executive floor, with its panoramic view of the city skyline, felt less like a workspace and more like a command center for my own life. The ghost of Natalie Pierce, who once haunted the quiet cubicle farms on the 4th floor, had no place here. She had been replaced by a leader. Building the quantum analytics division from scratch was the most demanding and deeply fulfilling endeavor of my life. My team. The 4 brilliant minds I'd rescued from the purgatory of George Peterson's mismanagement was a powerhouse of innovation. There was Liam, a caffeine-fueled coding prodigy who saw data streams like a composer sees a symphony. Maria, a quiet but fiercely logical strategist, who could find the fatal flaw in any proposal in under 5 minutes. And the twins, Ben and Leo, whose competitive synergy produced some of our most groundbreaking algorithms. We were a small, agile unit, an island of focused creation amidst the vast ocean of corporate bureaucracy. Our days were a chaotic symphony of whiteboard diagrams, furious keyboard clatter, and the constant fragrant aroma of brewing coffee. We argued, we celebrated, we pushed each other past our limits. And for the first time in my career, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My interactions with Dominic were a constant, a gravitational center around which my new orbit stabilized. We had our scheduled weekly progress meetings via video conference, his sharp, intelligent face filling my screen. He was a demanding boss, his questions always probing, always pushing me to defend my conclusions with irrefutable data. He dismantled my arguments only to force me to rebuild them stronger. In one memorable meeting, he challenged a core assumption of our predictive model. I spent the next 48 hours without sleep, running simulations and digging through raw data until I found the proof I needed. I presented my findings to him the following day, my voice steady despite my exhaustion. He listened intently, and when I was finished, a slow smile spread across his face. "Good," he'd said simply. "I was hoping you'd prove me wrong." It wasn't just a job. It was a mentorship, a high-stakes intellectual sparring match that left me feeling sharper and more alive after every round. Beneath the rigid professionalism, however, an undeniable undercurrent flowed between us. It was in the way his eyes would hold mine for a beat too long after I'd made a particularly salient point, or the shared knowing smirk we'd exchange when another executive used a tired corporate platitude. The gala and the kiss was the elephant in every virtual room we shared, a silent, unspoken event that was never mentioned but always present. It wasn't an embarrassment. It was the strange, supercharged catalyst for everything that had followed the foundational event of our entire professional relationship. One Friday evening, nearly a month after that fateful night, the energy of the work week had finally dissipated. My team had gone home, leaving me alone in the quiet hum of the office. The city outside my window was a glittering tapestry of light against the deep indigo of the twilight sky. I was at the whiteboard, lost in the elegant sprawl of an algorithm trying to solve a particularly stubborn latency issue. I was so engrossed sketching out data flows with a black marker that I didn't hear the soft click of my office door opening. "I thought I might find you here," a calm voice said from the doorway. I spun around, my heart giving a startled leap. Dominic was leaning against the doorframe, his presence filling the space. He was dressed in dark, well-fitting jeans and a simple charcoal sweater, the casual attire a stark contrast to his usual tailored suits. It made him look younger, more accessible, and somehow more real. "Burning the midnight oil?" I asked, a nervous smile touching my lips as I put the cap back on my marker. My hand felt smudged with ink. "Sometimes the best ideas come when the building is quiet," he replied, his eyes scanning my sprawling diagram as he walked into the room. He moved with an easy, confident grace. He stopped before the whiteboard, studying my complex web of notes and equations with an intense focus that made me feel both scrutinized and seen. "This is brilliant," he said, his voice a low murmur. He pointed with a long finger to a specific junction in the flowchart. "You've bypassed the recursive loop. You've solved the latency problem." "Theoretically," I corrected, a flush of pride warming my cheeks, "we still need to build the test environment and run the simulations." "It'll work," he said with an unshakable certainty that I was beginning to recognize as his hallmark. He then turned his gaze from the whiteboard, and his gray eyes, so often analytical and demanding, were now soft and serious as they met mine. "I didn't come here to talk about work, Natalie." My breath hitched. The professional boundary that had been so clearly defined between us suddenly felt porous, dissolving in the quiet intimacy of the empty office. "Oh," was all I managed to say. "I came to ask you to dinner," he said, his voice straightforward, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "And I want to be clear. I'm not asking as your boss. I'm not asking as the man you kissed at a gala. I'm asking as a man who is endlessly fascinated by the way your mind works and would very much like to get to know the woman it belongs to." His directness was a gust of fresh air. There were no games, no hidden meanings, just a clear and respectful invitation. The old fearful part of me, the part conditioned by Justin's manipulative charm, whispered warnings. But a newer, stronger voice, the one I had been cultivating for the past month, shouted it down. This wasn't Justin, who had seen me as an accessory to his own ambition. This was Dominic, the man who had recognized my value when it was invisible to everyone else, including at times myself. "I'd like that very much," I said, and the smile that bloomed on my face felt genuine and luminous, a true reflection of the woman I was becoming. He took me to a small, quiet Italian restaurant tucked away on a cobblestone side street, the kind of place you would never find unless you knew it was there. The owner, a bustling man named Gino, greeted Dominic with a warm embrace and led us to a secluded corner table. The air smelled of garlic wine and baking bread. Over plates of fresh pasta and a bottle of rich Chianti, we talked for hours. He told me about his first failed startup, the ramen noodle years, and the stubborn belief that had kept him going. I found myself telling him about my childhood love for solving puzzles, my abandoned dream of becoming an astrophysicist, and the slow, insidious way I had allowed my own ambitions to be subsumed by Justin's. He listened with a focused empathy that was profoundly healing, making me feel as though my story, my whole story, mattered. Later, as he walked me to the door of my apartment building, a comfortable, easy silence settled between us. The night was cool, and the city sounds were a distant, muted symphony. "For what it's worth," he said, stopping under the warm glow of the entrance light and turning to face me, "I'm glad you kissed me." I felt a surprised laugh bubble up. "You are?" "Yes," he confirmed, a faint wry smile playing on his lips. "It was the most interesting and audacious business proposal I've ever received." "And what exactly was the proposal?" I asked, my heart feeling light and hopeful. He stepped a fraction closer, the space between us charged with a gentle electricity. His gray eyes searched mine, their expression warm and sincere. It was a proposal to stop looking at the spreadsheets and start looking at the brilliant, overlooked analyst who was writing them. It was a demand to be seen. He paused. "And I'm very, very glad I accepted." I thought he might kiss me then. I wanted him to. But he didn't. Instead, he reached out and gently took my hand, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. It was a gesture of connection, not of possession, a promise of something beginning, not a claim of victory. It was an act of profound respect, an acknowledgement that I was on my own journey, and he was willing to walk at my pace. "Good night, Natalie," he said softly before letting my hand go and stepping back. As I closed my apartment door behind me and leaned against it, a sense of deep, abiding peace washed over me. The fire of Justin's betrayal had been devastating, burning my old life down to the foundations. But I was learning that sometimes a fire is necessary to clear the land for new growth. I had found my voice, my power, and my self-worth, not in the reflection of a man's love, but in the steady, quiet confidence of my own capabilities. The future was no longer a straight, predictable line that someone else had drawn for me. It was a complex, beautiful quantum equation of my own design, and for the first time in my life, I couldn't wait to solve it. Natalie's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes our lowest moments are just the launching pad for our greatest comeback. She thought she was walking into a night of humiliation, but she walked out with a future she built herself. Her journey wasn't about the billionaire's rescue. It was about her finally claiming the power and talent she had all along. It's a story of karma, of resilience, and the incredible things that can happen when you refuse to be erased. What did you think of Natalie's moment of defiance? Have you ever had a moment where you had to stand up and reclaim your own story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you and sharing in these stories of strength. If you were inspired by Natalie's journey from a ghost in the machine to the head of her own division, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next story. Thanks for listening.